Protesters interrupt the hearing. The cameras zoom in. The microphone flickers red. And then Kristi Noem begins reading off numbers that sound almost too big to believe. 3 million illegal aliens have left. Border encounters down 96%. 1,500 terrorists arrested. 1.7 billion lethal drug doses prevented. That wasn't just testimony. That was a political offensive delivered under oath. But here's the question no protest chant answered and no statistic can avoid. Are these historic security gains or carefully packaged campaign talking points? Tonight, we break down what really happened inside that Senate hearing, what Noem claimed, what it means, and what lawmakers must now verify. Because when the Department of Homeland Security becomes the centerpiece of a political narrative, oversight isn't optional. It's essential.
Would you please stand to be sworn? Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you for that positive response. Please go ahead and give your opening statement.
Kristi Noem, you should be ashamed of yourself. I'm a former FEMA
Okay. Well,
agency. FEMA employees should be responding to disasters, not ICE. You should be ashamed of yourself. Yours now say abolish ICE. Yours now say abolish ICE. Yours now say abolish ICE.
you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member, Senator Durbin, as well, and the distinguished members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today and talk about the important matters and work that the Department of Homeland Security does every single day. The Department of Homeland Security...
Hey, could maybe pull the microphone closer to you, please?
Okay.
And the red light is on?
Yep, it is.
Okay, proceed.
The Department of Homeland Security was established in the aftermath of 9/11, one of the darkest days in our nation's history. That resulted in the death of nearly 3,000 Americans. The mission of the Department of Homeland Security at that time was just as critical as it is today. We protect our American people, we prevent acts of terrorism, and we defend our homeland. Every action that the Department of Homeland Security takes is guided by that mission and by that responsibility. Thanks to President Trump's leadership and the hard work of the men and women of DHS, our department has delivered historic results and has made our communities safer. Since the start of President Trump's second term, daily encounters along the southwest border declined by 96% compared to the Biden administration's daily average. We've reached the lowest levels ever recorded in U.S. Customs and Border Protection's history. In President Trump's first year, total Border Patrol apprehensions along the southwest border were less than the average of a single month under the Biden administration. For 10 straight months, the Border Patrol has released 0 illegal aliens into the interior of the United States. And in President Trump's historic first year back in office, nearly 3 million illegal aliens have left the United States as a result of the administration's enforcement efforts from following the law. That includes 2.2 million that have voluntarily left and returned back to their home countries, and more than 675,000 detainments and deportations. A majority of the aliens that were arrested by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement have a criminal record and have been charged with or convicted of secondary crimes in addition to their initial crime of being in the United States illegally. During this period, ICE has arrested over 1,500 known and suspected terrorists, more than 7,700 known gang members, many of them that were allowed to come into this country under the Biden administration. We have also reached the lowest murder rate in the last 125 years since that data was tracked. Under President Biden, more than 450,000 unaccompanied alien children went missing or were lost due to the dangerous open border policies that were embraced. Under President Trump, the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Health and Human Services have already located over 145,000 of these children and returned them back to their families and back to people who care about them. And we will not stop until every single one of those children is found. Fentanyl trafficking at the southern border is down. It's been cut by over 56% because of that secure border and the enforcement actions that have been taken there. And that's compared to the same period of time in 2024. The Coast Guard has seized enough cocaine the past year to prevent quantities capable of killing more than 193 million Americans, and it's kept them off of our streets. In fact, total interdiction efforts under the Trump administration have prevented 1.7 billion lethal doses of drugs from killing our next generation of Americans. These results reflect the fact that we are enforcing the laws that Congress has passed. I want to address the dangerous environment that our ICE officers face on the streets today. They are facing a serious and escalating threat as a result of deliberate mischaracterizations of their heroic work and rhetoric that demonizes our law enforcement. DHS has documented an 8,000% increase in death threats against our ICE officers and their families, as well as more than 1,300% increase in assaults while carrying out the lawful enforcement operations that they do every single day. I recognize that members of this committee may hold differing views about immigration policy, but it's important that we distinguish between disagreements over policy and the department's operational responsibility to enforce existing law that has been passed by Congress. It's our duty as a department to defend our homeland. The latest Democrat-led shutdown of DHS is reckless, it's unnecessary, and it undermines the American national security, and it harms the men and women who work at DHS and their families. Despite the House passing a bipartisan, bicameral full-year DHS funding bill, it is Senate Democrats who've chosen not to fund the department and have held this department hostage. As a result, critical national security missions, including border security, immigration enforcement, aviation security, disaster response, cybersecurity, and the protection of critical infrastructure are all being strained. Our ability to provide for a safe and successful World Cup is being hindered as well. More than 100,000 dedicated DHS employees are once again being asked to work without pay for the third time in just 5 months. At a time when we've produced the most secure border in history and removed nearly 3 million illegal aliens from our country, disrupting the department responsible for those gains is indefensible. I want to thank the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security for their professionalism, for their dedication, for their commitment to keeping America safe and continuing to show up and work even though they aren't being compensated for it. They've kept us safe and they have patience, and our success is only possible because of their service and sacrifices. I also want to thank our angel families that are behind us to tell their stories and testimonies, and also thank my husband for being here in support as well. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, Mr. Chairman, and to all the distinguished members. I look forward to your questions today. With that, I yield back.
Now, let's be clear. Border security matters. Drug trafficking is real. ICE officers face serious risks. None of that is in dispute. But here's what is in dispute. Context. When an administration highlights border encounters being down 96% compared to what baseline? What time frame? Are those numbers seasonal? Are they influenced by policy changes in neighboring countries? Are asylum rules shifting how encounters are counted? When nearly 3 million migrants are said to have left, how many were deported versus voluntarily departed? What qualifies as voluntary? Were people given due process? Were asylum claims adjudicated? Or were policies structured to discourage filing in the first place? These are not partisan questions. They are oversight questions. And that's where this hearing becomes critical. Because Noem didn't just defend enforcement. She framed opposition as reckless. She accused Senate Democrats of holding DHS hostage. She described a department producing the most secure border in history while being undermined politically. That's not neutral bureaucratic language. That's political contrast messaging. And when the Department of Homeland Security, the agency tasked with immigration enforcement, disaster response, aviation security, cyber defense, becomes the vehicle for campaign framing, Congress has an obligation to push harder. Another major claim involved unaccompanied migrant children. Noem referenced 450,000 children allegedly lost under previous policies and said 145,000 have now been located. That is an emotionally charged statistic. But lost can mean a range of administrative breakdowns, missed follow-up calls, address changes, sponsorship documentation gaps. It does not automatically mean physically missing in the way the word suggests. Precision matters, especially when children are involved. She also highlighted fentanyl trafficking being cut by 56% and 1.7 billion lethal doses prevented from reaching Americans. That sounds staggering because it is designed to sound staggering. But drug interdiction metrics are complex. Seizure increases can sometimes reflect improved detection rather than reduced supply. And lethal doses are often calculated using theoretical potency thresholds, not necessarily actual distribution realities. Again, the issue isn't whether drug enforcement is necessary. The issue is how those numbers are framed. And then there's the 8,000% increase in threats against ICE officers. If accurate, that is deeply concerning. Law enforcement officials should never face threats against their families. But percentage increases can be misleading if the baseline number was small to begin with. A jump from 5 documented threats to 405 would technically represent a massive percentage spike. We need raw numbers, not just percentages. Because percentages persuade. Raw numbers clarify. What stood out most in this hearing wasn't the protest interruption. It was the strategic positioning. Noem tied nearly every positive metric directly to Donald Trump's leadership. Border success wasn't described as institutional improvement. It was described as presidential strength. The contrast with the previous administration wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. That signals something important. Immigration is not just policy right now. It's campaign architecture. The administration wants border enforcement to be seen as proof of competence, strength, and restoration of order. And they want any resistance to funding or oversight framed as weakness. That's a powerful narrative. But oversight is not obstruction. Congress exists to test claims, to request documentation, to demand independent verification, to ask whether enforcement tactics align with constitutional protections and humanitarian obligations. The protest at the beginning of the hearing symbolized the polarization around immigration policy. But the real test comes after the cameras stop focusing on the disruption and start focusing on the data. Are the declines sustainable? Are the deportations legally processed? Are asylum systems functioning fairly? Are communities actually safer? And how is that measured? If DHS truly has produced historic results, the data will withstand scrutiny. If it doesn't, then Americans deserve transparency. Because immigration enforcement carries enormous human consequences. Families are affected. Communities are reshaped. International relationships shift. Border towns bear impact. Urban centers feel ripple effects. This is not just a numbers debate. It's a values debate. Security and humanity are not mutually exclusive. But striking that balance requires facts, not slogans. So as this Senate hearing continues, here's what matters. Not the protest. Not the applause lines. Not the viral clips. What matters is whether lawmakers on both sides demand documentation behind every dramatic claim. Because when a Homeland Security Secretary delivers campaign-style metrics under oath, democracy requires more than reaction. It requires verification. And that's what we'll be watching closely.